Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming at this early hour after yesterday night's party. So really appreciate it. So my name is Chao Zhang, and this is my colleague, Kelly Hutchins. I'm a UX architect for ArcGIS Online. Kelly, can you
I'm a product engineer on the ArcGIS API for JavaScript team.
Okay. So this presentation is kind of like a follow-up of yesterday's presentation. But this presentation will be focusing more on developers. How do you develop web applications that are accessible? So just background information, you may have seen these slides yesterday, but what is accessibility? So accessibility is to make content usable by as many people as possible. So you could have, we're not talking about, not just only about like permanent disabilities, but also situational or temporal, right? You could have, maybe you'll be in a really dark room, you're trying to look at a screen, or maybe in a crowded environment, you may have a handful of things. You may need to use one hand to use your mobile phone, or maybe you may get an accident and get injured with one hand, which happened to me one time, right? So there's a lot of situations where you may need help from the technology. You may have some kind of impairment, but still you want to use the technology. Also, there's like some statistics here. So about 15% of world population, they have some sort of disability. And if you convert that percentage to a number, it's actually really huge, 1 billion people. So it's a big market if you want to make your technology available to those people. And particularly in the US, 1 in 5 adults has a disability. So that's 20% of the population, the adult population. So it's still a big market if you want to make your technology available to as many customers as possible. And why is accessibility important? I think people with disabilities, they deserve equal right? That's the spirit of the internet. When the internet was created, it was meant for everyone to use it. We shouldn't create technology barriers for web content so that only a portion of the population can use it. Everyone should be able to use it if they can get on the internet. And also, if you are in government or education or some nonprofit organizations, you may have to comply with government laws or regulations that require all of your content to be accessible. At Esri, we definitely get a lot of pressure from our government clients that we need to make our product accessible. So definitely there's some kind of like regulation I need to follow. Also, accessibility really means good design and good experience. So I was talking about yesterday, some of the things that we encounter every day on the web, like low contrast issues. You have to use the mouse to use the website, or text is just rendered on top of the image. It's really hard to kind of figure out what the text is because the background is cluttered, or you just see a wall of text. You cannot change the text size. All those kind of things not only affect people with disabilities, but also everyone like us. And also, inevitably, we will grow old, we will have poor eyesight, we'll have poor hearing, those kind of things. Also, so accessibility is just for everyone, right? If you do good accessibility, you will increase your you will improve your user experience for your website. That it's just a really good, not just for disabled users, but also for everyone. So, what are we doing at Esri? So we're a small team of accessibility advocates, if you will. We're sharing knowledge internally, but also we periodically review products internally and make sure we identify issues for developers and designers to address. For every new feature we develop, we try to build in the accessibility support from the beginning. So from the design, we make sure we use good color contrast. We also review the UI built by the developer, make sure we have good semantic code. And we are trying to going back to all those legacy pages and fix those issues when we redesign those legacy pages. So we also have a group on GeoNet, accessibility group. So we're trying to share our knowledge there as well. And we also really welcome users like you to go to that group and share your experience, ask us questions, give us feedback on new features, give us requirement on where we should put our resources on in terms of accessibility. That will be really helpful. And we also have some new features, new accessibility features built into products like story map. We're also designing the content and search experience ArcGIS Online, and those things should be really accessible. So speaking of accessibility, the most important thing I think you should know is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. This is WCAG. This is international guideline. It's also adopted by the US government in the Section 508 regulation. So we are currently using WCAG 2.0, but there's active work on the 2.1 version of this guideline. And I think they just released the final draft, so which will get voted and turn into the formal document pretty soon. So we are actively following up the updates. There's some exciting changes or improvement in terms of accessibility. One of the examples is that you can use a magic link to log into a website. So you don't have to type your password, or if you have difficulty typing special characters, you can just get a magic link in your email, which you have some way to authenticate, and then click on the link, boom, you're into the website. So this is just an overview of WCAG 2.0. So you have these 4 principles, and for each principle, it divided to a certain number of success criteria. And for each success criterion, you have different levels of compliance. Level A is the basic level, right? That's the minimum you should do to make your website accessible. And level AA is what we are trying to achieve at Esri, which is also recommended by W3C. Level AAA requires a higher effort, so things like sign language interpretation, live captioning. If you can achieve level AAA, that would be really great. But it's often companies, organizations have to prioritize their resource. So that's why we're aiming for level AA. But whenever possible, we want to match level AAA. So the first principle here, perceivable, is that user must be able to perceive the information no matter how the information is presented. So you can't present the information in a way that certain sense can see that image, see that information. So one example is that if you have images with text, you either need to provide a way for the user to recognize the text from the image, or you need to provide alternate text for the image. So you cannot just put text in the image and only a sighted user can see that image and the text. And then the operable is that user must be able to use the web content in a way that user has the ability to do so. So you cannot require the user that the user has to use a mouse to use the website. So that's against the recommendation. So you have to make the website keyboard operable. The keyboard is required is used by like non-sighted users when they use screen reader. And then understandable. So user must be able to understand the information. So some user may have cognitive impairment, so that you can write the information in a way that is really difficult to understand. You can just use a lot of terminologies, acronyms that require user to hold their working memory on what this term means and what that term means, right? So make it easy to understand, not only help people with cognitive impairment, but also everyone. So they don't have to constantly look for what that information means, what that term means. And then the fourth principle here is the robust. So as the user's technology evolves, we still need to make sure our information can work with all kinds of devices, all kinds of technologies. So you need to have a certain way of fallback, if you will, for older technologies. As you may know, screen reader is always lagging behind the latest browser technology. The screen reader relies on the getting the information from the browser and then turn that information in a way that a screen reader can understand. So definitely there's a gap there in terms of technology, and we want to make sure if you are using the latest technology, you still have a really good fallback for older technologies. So guess what we will cover today? We can cover everything from WCAG, so we choose some of the most important things that you can get started and still make a huge difference. So we will cover focus and keyboard. That's how you make your website operable by keyboard only. And we'll cover color. Right? Color is really important for people with low vision or color blindness. And we will talk about information and relationships. And this is something we see a lot when developers develop their applications. They don't necessarily pay attention to the semantics of the code. So I think we think it's as important to point that out. And we'll also talk about how do you test accessibility. And there's some tools and procedures that we would recommend you follow. And then we'll talk about some of the progress we have made in the last year or so in terms of making map accessible. We got some feedback last year, so we should talk about how Esri is doing to make map accessible, and we'll show you some prototypes we've developed. So first I'll turn to Kelly.
Thanks. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about focus and keyboard. So we have the oh, wait, can you switch to 4?
Sorry. Yeah.
If we forget to switch and you guys are seeing something on the screen that we're not talking about, someone just wave their hand and we'll switch it. I'm number 4.
4, yes.
Okay.
Got it.
Okay, so we have the WCAG guideline up there that talks about, any keyboard operable user interface, has to have this focus indicator visible. So on the widget on the left, that's the directions widget, and that shows the blue outline, the focus widget around it. So that's something that you should have in your apps. The JS API 4.x widgets all have that focus. They're you can tab through them and the focus ring will appear. It's not something that you should turn off. It can be a little bit frustrating because when we add focus to these widgets, sometimes the first feedback that you get from people is like, hey, there's this annoying blue line that just showed up on my widget the other day. How can I make that go away? So I usually try and just say, well, that's there for accessibility reasons and explain a little bit why it's important. And then usually people learn to accept the fact that the focus ring is visible. But all the HTML elements should have that clear focus ring that's easy to see. Oh, is this one that had? No.
No, yeah.
Okay. In the JavaScript API, we also have some focus methods and events. So we add, for 4.7, which is the next release that comes out, I think in April, we added focus to the map view and scene view, so you can actually tab into the map, and we haven't had that focus ring that was easy to see before, but it'll be there now. You'll see it in our demo later. Pop-up and search also have methods that let you set the focus. So in this example, the code example, this is an example of maybe you have a search box and you're letting somebody do a search and they get the search results. The problem has always been like they can see the search results and that search widget you've been able to navigate through the keyboard for a long time. But then the pop-up comes up and it wasn't easy to make it focusable, so there wasn't a great way to take them to tab into that pop-up. So in this example, we say when the search pop-up is visible, go ahead and focus on the pop-up, and then that's where they are. They're focused in the pop-up and they can navigate through it with the keyboard. And then we have this else, so when the pop-up's not visible, we go ahead and set the focus back to the search widget, which is where they came from. So it's a nicer experience for them. So again, this is talking about tab order. So we have the focus on all of our widgets. We also have tab order. It might be kind of hard to see, but you can see that widget on the slide is filling out the fields, and as they tab through to fill out the fields, you can clearly see the focus ring, so there's a clear idea of which field you're in and the information that you need to fill out. You want to, so tab order is important. It's supposed to be that you navigate through the page in a clear and logical manner. So you want to avoid too much moving around of elements on your page via CSS, and you also want to avoid jumping around in tab order. So you wouldn't want to change the tab order so somebody enters the start location and then all of a sudden they're down in some options section. It needs to follow the logical order of the page so it makes sense. So here's a little bit more information about tab index. So you can set tab index equals 0. That just lets the logical structure of the page determine the tab index. So the order of where that element is on the page determines its tab order, and that's the recommended approach. If you need to temporarily take something out of focus, you can set it to -1, and then when you need to focus it, set it back to 0. The thing that you want to avoid is setting anything to a tab index greater than 0 because it takes it out of the logical order. It takes precedence. It just modifies the behavior of the page, and it's not recommended. It's an anti-pattern. And the testing tools that we talk about later will definitely flag that as an issue. So again, Tao mentioned this earlier too. So keyboard users should be able to use all of the functionality on the page using the keyboard only. They shouldn't have to be required to use a mouse because in many cases, people aren't able to use a mouse. Interactive elements like buttons and links all have built in the screen readers and assistive technology knows how to make those keyboard accessible. You don't have to do anything. If you create a button and you use the button element, it's clickable. It's got focus, people can access it via the keyboard. The problem comes where you use things like divs or spans as a button. Those aren't interactive, then you as the developer need to handle that interactivity, so you need to do some extra work. So in general, use semantic HTML elements. If you've got a button on your page, make it a button, style that button if you want to change its appearance, and it'll make your life much easier. The map view and scene view in 4.x have keyboard support out of the box. I have the table up there. This is also available in the help. You can use the arrow keys to move left and right, up or down. You can point north, you can rotate clockwise, and you can zoom in and zoom out. So this has always been there, and it's accessible now. So at 4.7, they'll be able to focus the map, and then once they're focused in the map, these keyboard map navigation will just work. So that's nice. So scene view, same idea, arrow keys to move the scene to the left or right, and it's got a few slightly different things because scene view is 3D and has this concept of the camera. So it's got a command to move the camera to look in a perpendicular motion. So we probably should have put this slide above the two map view ones, but this is an example in the top. So we have a div that we're using, that div as a button. So there's a few things to look at that we had to do to ensure that assistive technology understands that this thing's a button, not just a div. It needs to know what to do with it. So we have a role set equal to button. We have tab index set to 0, so this thing's focusable and in the tab order. And then below that, we have some JavaScript that gets that button ID, listens for some particular key codes, in this case, enter and space keys, so that it behaves similar to the button. So we have to do all this work just because for some reason, we didn't use the button element for a button. We wanted to use a div for a button. So save yourself some keystrokes and just use a button. Okay, so another WCAG criteria is that you can't trap keyboard focus. So I don't know if you've ever tried to keyboard navigate a website and you open like a modal or a dialogue and then you're stuck there and there's no way to get out of that dialogue. So that's one issue that comes up. And the other issue is that if you're in a modal dialogue, your focus needs to stay inside of that dialogue until people close that dialogue, right? So you open the modal dialogue. You don't want people to be able to tab through it and then not close it, but just tab out of that modal, right? It needs to stay within the modal until they, cancel, accept, whatever that modal's asking them to do. Once they've dismissed that, you also need to take care of setting the focus back to the previously focused element. So whatever opened up that dialogue or modal, you need to set your focus back to that. So I think we have an example here. I always click too many times. So this shows you as you're tabbing through, you can see the clear focus screen. And we see that we just keep cycling through, right? So until somebody actually closes that modal, we're inside of that dialogue. Once they hit, one of the buttons that cancels them out, here we're canceling out. Now focus goes back to, in this case, the button that popped that modal up. So there's an example here. Do you have the page open?
Yep. Nope, but I can.
Okay, well the URL's at the bottom.
Yeah.
I was just going to show you the page. Sorry, there's this weird little glitch with PowerPoint on the Mac where I have to close out of the slideshow and then open Chrome. So I'm just going to see if Tao can bring it up. So
Yep.
if you want to see, I'll let you talk through since you've got it open.
Yeah, so now my focus is on the button. So if I press enter, I should be able to open up the dialog. And you see that my focus is on the first input field of the dialog, which is nice. So I can just start working on the dialog. Once I finish all those fields, and then I can click on add or cancel to dismiss the dialog. But notice if I dismiss the dialog, my focus is set back to the button that opens the dialog. So I don't have to, like, say, start from the beginning of the page and tab all the way down to where the button is, right? So it's really nice experience, even for like non-keyboard users.
So, and if you need to do something like this in your app, this document, and there's a link to it in the PDF of the slides that you'll get later, has a lot of information and details on how you can make that work.
So I switch back to you.
Yeah.
Nice.
Okay, so Tao mentioned that we're going to talk about how you test each of these criteria. So there's some information on how you test focus and keyboard. This is one of the things that some of this gets caught with the testing tools, but you really need to do some manual testing. You need to actually tab through all of the content on the page. Sometimes when I'm doing it, because we tend to reach for our mouse a lot if we use a mouse, I will like unplug it or push it like behind my laptop, so I'm forced to just remain in the keyboard. So you want to tab through the page to ensure that every interactive element has that visible focus ring. So that's one of the first tests. You want to test that the focus order matches the expected interaction order. You don't want to be, on field 2 of a form, and then you hit tab, and all of a sudden you're on some other portion of the page, and then you tab again and you're back in the form. So you want to make sure that the focus order is logical and expected. You want to, again, make sure that you can interact with everything on the page using only the keyboard, and that you don't run into any keyboard traps, so you don't get into dialogues where you're stuck, except for things like modals where you want to be stuck until someone accepts, cancels, whatever options your modal has. And then finally, off-screen content, like if you have responsive navigation, so you've built a website where things show up in different screen sizes, you want to make sure that it doesn't receive focus when invisible. So sometimes you would see like a focus ring on the page, but that you can't see the content because it's hidden, right? You can test for that and make sure it doesn't happen.
Okay, back to me.
Back to Tao.
Okay, so color contrast. So WCAG has a guideline that says you cannot use color only to convey information. So one of the example here is the form validation. Sometimes you will see form that when you have an error, it just like highlight the input field with kind of like a different border, color border. But it's really hard for people with color blindness to notice that change. Usually that color is red for some reason, so right? So you need to add another way of conveying that error message, either by using an icon or a text message below the input field. And then another example on the right is the map, right? So not only we use the different color shade or different type of gray to indicate the different lines, but also, I don't know if you can see it, but each line has a different pattern. Actually, the pattern is or the texture is really good to differentiate between different types of shapes. So instead of using color, I really recommend using the pattern. Is when people, like, say, print the page out, they may use like black-white printer, but you still can see the difference from the output of the print, even there's no color in it, right? And then another relevant criteria for color is the minimum contrast. So this affects everyone almost, right? So the normal text need to have a color contrast of at least 4.5, and larger text we can relax that the requirement a little bit to 3.0. The color contrast is really important because you don't want to say you don't want to use like really similar color between the background and the foreground. And then there's tools that you can use to detect or calculate the color contrast. So in order to test color, so the first thing is to do a manual verification and just look at the things that only conveyed by color. And this requires some kind of experience, but if you use the page, you will notice that only conveyed by color. And then some of the automated testing tool like X will calculate the color contrast of your, like say, buttons or links. It will point out that things that require a higher contrast. And then I always, sometimes it's really hard for the automated testing tool to detect change if the text is on like a gradient background or on the image. So I always go to the code and look at the CSS and see just find out the background color and the foreground color and put into a color contrast ratio calculator, which I can have here. I usually use this one because you can type the color name, or you can type the RGB code, or you can type the hex code in it. It will give you a ratio result. You know that if this inside, if it turns red, or if it says below 4.5, then you know that that's not accessible. And you need to probably work with your designer and make sure you use a better color. I think we can switch back to Kelly.
Yeah. I just wanted to show you an example of sort of a real-world failure that I think ties into color that Tao was just talking about, and how taking accessibility into account makes the site better for everybody. So this is a tool that I use all the time, and I don't mean to beat up on them. It's Emmet. It's something I use in Visual Studio Code. But their cheat sheet, which is like quick, keyboard shortcuts to access the content, I can't even read that. So there's no way that meets the color contrast requirements with the gray, dark gray text on a black background if you're trying to look at the code examples. So I just think this is a good example of how if they'd followed accessible guidelines, the site would be way more usable by all of us, not just for people who have permanent disabilities. So just a side note. Okay, so I'm going to talk about info and relationships. So, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but assistive technologies rely on the code structure to know what to do. So they need to know how to take your page and convert it into something that a screen reader can understand, right? So screen reader is the tool that will read that content to people who are visually impaired. So the way that your site is structured and the HTML elements that you use is really important, because that's how we as developers communicate with that assistive technology to let it know what we expect people to do. So when somebody who's not non-sighted goes to your page, they need to be able to get all that same content as sighted users in a way that's clear and informative. So we have this example here where people who are not visually impaired in the top example, they see something as a checkbox. But people who are using a screen reader to access that information do not know that it's a checkbox. We have not told the screen reader in any way, shape, or form that the top item is a checkbox. It's a list item that's been styled with CSS to perform as a checkbox, and the assistive technology doesn't know about that. So if you're visually impaired, you go to the site and you're not sure what's going on. The second example below actually sets a role of checkbox, and it's got some ARIA attributes. So now the screen reader understands that this is a checkbox, and it knows how to present that information to non-sighted users in a way that's clear and understandable. So I talked a little bit about how the browser has this responsibility to take your content on the page and translate it to something that the assistive technology like screen readers can use. So there's a specification for how this accessibility tree exists. So what the accessibility tree is it's just the DOM content that's rendered in a way that screen readers can understand. And I sort of think of it as like an old school website that's just like links and buttons and a few bits of text, nothing fancy. It's just what the screen reader needs to present the functional page to your users. I'll show you, actually, let me exit the slideshow. If we go to Chrome Developer Tools, so I just right-clicked and inspect on the element, click on the Accessibility tab. This is a great thing to check out, a great section of Chrome Dev Tools. It has information on the accessibility tree. So if you're curious how your page is, the information on your page is conveyed to screen readers, you can come and check this out, and you can see, you know, what it does to your content or how it thinks your content is behaving. So this is just a nice, quick way to see what you're conveying. Oh, I guess I should have on the previous slide. So ARIA is one of the things. So in this previous example, so the DOM is one part of it, right? So the accessibility tree, you can read the DOM and translate it. But like I mentioned on this slide, it doesn't know that this list item is a checkbox because it's just the HTML DOM node, and we haven't told it it's a checkbox. The way we tell it is a checkbox is with this ARIA information. So ARIA lets us enhance the HTML DOM elements with special attributes that give more information to the screen reader. So in the second example, we're saying, hey, screen reader, I know this thing's a list item, but we have this ARIA checked attribute, and we have this role of checkbox. So now you know that this thing is a checkbox. So it enhances that checkbox, provides information, additional information to the screen reader. There's actually, this is actually a really great document. Sometimes the spec documentation is really difficult to understand and read. I think this is an exception. Let's go there actually really quickly and just look at it for a minute. It's a document that you should probably bookmark and become familiar with. Should have had it open beforehand. So you can read through it. The important things I think are the various widgets. So let's say you need to work with a table. It's got lots of content on the expected keyboard interaction, on the ARIA roles and properties that you need to use, additional notes, etc. And so it's there for a bunch of different kinds of widgets. So this is really useful if you're taking existing HTML elements, divs, spans, lists, etc., and combining them to create menus or tables or a custom widget of some way, shape, or form. So this topic has lots of good information, and it's worth reading through. I don't know if you have anything else to say about that while I go back to...
Nope.
Okay. Okay, so bypass blocks are useful. Large sites, we'll see an example of it in a minute, that have lots of content, should have a way for people to skip directly to the navigation so they can easily get to the portion of the page that has relevant information and they don't have to tab through a bunch of content that's maybe not super relevant. So here's an example of bypass blocks. I think it's probably kind of hard to see, but at the top of the page, you've all probably seen it on sites. There's a little sort of kind of hidden text that says skip to content, but that'll be the first thing that they tab into, gets focused, and then they can skip immediately. In this case, it skips down to the navigation that lets them navigate various portions of the developer site. So it's a quick way to avoid all the tabbing through all the content on the page, menus and titles and descriptions, and get directly to the page navigation. So we need labels and instructions. If you just have a text box on the page, no label or instruction, people aren't sure what to put in there. So all form inputs by WCAG criteria require that you have a label. There's a couple of different ways of associating a label with the text inputs. We have the first example where we have this label, and inside of the label is the input, so the label is associated with its corresponding input field. The second example, we use for to associate the label with its input. So you can see right here, we use for and tell it this label is for this first name field. And then the third option is maybe useful in cases where you don't have a label that you want to display on the screen. So the JavaScript API search widget is an example of this. We just have the search input that's on your page. We don't have a label above that says search. It's not in a form. It's just a search element that displays on the page. So you can set ARIA label. ARIA label, remember we talked about ARIA attributes. That's going to let the assistive technology know, okay, this is the label that we read out when we're working with this input. Live regions are useful. I use them in a prototype app. We'll show you in a little bit. They let the screen reader announce when content has changed. So maybe there's some stock market ticker update that you have on the page, and as new information comes in, you might want to announce that new information for people to know. There's various different kinds. I have a table there showing the different roles that you can associate with a live region. And we'll see this in action in a minute, but you can do it for timers and progress bars, alerts, and just status updates. So there's a lot of information in that ARIA doc on live regions. I will say they can be kind of fussy to use and kind of fussy to get right, but it's useful. How to test this information, the info and relationship section. You always want to start with an automated test. It's going to catch the low-hanging fruit, the easy things to fix. Then again, we use a screen reader to tab through a page. We're sort of seeing like a pattern here, right? These are the things you have to do. Run automated tests. Make sure you can keyboard navigate through your page. Ensure that page has an easy way to get to the navigation with a skip navigation. Landmarks, screen readers can let people navigate directly through landmarks, so it's nice to have landmarks in your page for people to easily navigate. You want to click on a label, so this is a test that I didn't know you should do until recently. I learned it from Tao. So you should click on the label to make sure that the form input associated with that label is selected. So if I click on the label, I should be focused on that form input. So that's a nice feature. And then finally, a nice test to always try is to use an actual screen reader to try and fill out the form. You can close your eyes or just turn your head away and see if you can actually navigate through your form and fill it out without using your mouse and without using your eyes to see the content on there, because that's what people are going to be trying to do when they access your site. So Tao's going to talk about some testing.
Yes, so you may have legacy pages, or somebody may ask you to do testing in terms of accessibility. So this is the process we recommend. Run the automated test first, because we'll detect a lot of the really basic issues or simple to fix issues, and then do the keyboard test like Kelly said. Use the keyboard only. Try to use that page and see if you encounter any difficulties. And then the last thing is to do the screen reader test that you can detect a lot of semantic issues, input field without any label, a label is not associated with a form field, those kind of things. For automated test, we recommend X. It's a JavaScript-based automated testing tool by DQ. It tests the render browser DOM. It can be run as a browser plugin. I believe the plugin is available in Chrome and Firefox. You can also run it as a CLI tool in your command line. You can integrate with WebDriver to do automated UI testing. It will give you a nice output of all the issues that it detects, and you can read through that issue. You can take the issue as a JSON object and put into some nice format document if you want. You can put it into a dashboard. We have some teams in Esri, they're trying to integrate X into their automated testing process. So whenever a developer submits a PR request, they get validated in terms of accessibility. They have to fix those accessibility issues before they can merge the code, which is nice, but sometimes it's kind of intimidating. But hopefully, if we all know accessibility, we all know write semantic code, that process will be really smooth. And also, the nice thing about X, I believe at one point I heard that X is the only plugin that itself is accessible for testing accessibility. Believe it or not, some disabled users are testers. They also use X to test web content. And also X has really good documentation. Some of them is part of the plugin itself, and some of them are linked to DQ University, I think that website is called. So whenever they say, hey, there's an issue, it has the reference that why that is an issue. It has the suggestions to fix that issue. So it's really good learning resource. I definitely learn a lot from using just X testing pages. So we talk about automated testing. So the next step is to do keyboard navigation test, and it's really simple. Normally you just need to use Tab and Shift Tab to move your keyboard focus on the page. If you have links or buttons, definitely use Enter or Enter space to click on link and buttons. Sometimes you may need to use arrow key if you have like option radio buttons, radio button groups or menus. And I think one thing I always forget is the checkbox is actually use space key to check the checkbox. I always try to use Enter key to check the checkbox and didn't answer, and I saw that's an issue. But my developer will point to me, hey, look at the W3 spec. You have to use space key to check on checkbox. This is really fun. Okay, so for keyboard user, so that's the keyboard test. And then for the screen reader test, here is the recommended combinations from a number of user surveys. So in Mac OS, you have the built-in screen reader called VoiceOver. VoiceOver works the best with Safari. And Windows, you have the NVDA, which is free. You can use it with Firefox to get the best results. Traditionally, there's JAWS that you can use with IE and Edge. JAWS is not free, so you have to pay for the license. So for screen reader, I just list out how do you turn on, how do you turn off. Sometimes, we hear one of the top help requests at the Apple Store is that people suddenly turn on the screen reader and they don't know how to turn it off. Then they go to the Apple Store and ask, how do I turn it off? So make sure you know this. But a lot of screen readers really rely on some kind of keyboard combination. Remember, screen reader users can only use keyboard. So each screen reader has this modifier key to start, and then you add another key to the modifier key to activate different screen reader features. So VoiceOver is the control option. For NVDA and JAWS, the default is the number pad insert, but you can modify to another key like caps lock key if you don't use that often. So here I just talk about the basic command I use when I use screen reader, use VoiceOver to go over a page. So you use the VoiceOver key plus the right and left arrow key to read the next or the previous item. If you feel like screen readers cannot stop saying things, press Control key to pause the stop the reading, and then to click link button or form control, use the voiceover key plus space. And then there's a nice feature in voiceover, I believe it's also in NVIDIA and JAWS. It's called a rotor or something similar. It will show you the headings on the page, all the links on the page, all the landmarks if you define them on the page. So it's a good navigation tool for screen reader users to get an overview of the page. So there's some videos on YouTube that shows how disabled users use screen reader to read a page. They don't like us. They don't like tab away from the top to bottom. They usually will open up the rotor and look at all the headings, look at all the links, landmarks, and just to find out where they want to go first. So definitely, if you have the chance, make sure you know that how the rotor works and how to activate it and how to use the rotor to navigate to different parts of the page. So that's testing. So Kelly, we'll switch back to Kelly. 4.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about making your map accessible. There's sort of sometimes you'll hear people say, why does a map need to be accessible if somebody can't see? What are they going to do with a map? Well, there's still useful information on that map that you need to convey to non-sighted users, right? They still want to know how to get from one building on their college campus to another. They still want to know where the closest grocery store is. They still want to see maybe what census district they're in if that's the information you're presenting on the map. So I think it's important to...
Plus this sound.
Yeah. Sorry, we're setting up for a little sound demo. Okay, so it's important to convey that information, and there's a few different ways to do it. Traditionally, some people will associate some textual descriptive information with a map, and in some cases that works. Maybe you just have a small map on the page that's showing a particular area, and you have some descriptive text that says something like, this is, a map showing the center of town in Nairobi or something, right? So some small descriptive information that can explain what's happening on your map. So in some cases that works great. In other cases, people will present the information in the map in a tabular format. So if you have data that is showing, information on a map about some area, like voting districts or something, you can present that information in tabular format so people can access it through the table. But we sort of wanted to play around with this concept of maybe letting people navigate through the map with the keyboard only, access the features and look at them without having to use a mouse. So we wanted to provide that way for keyboard only users to access that content, navigate through it, and interact with it. So I started looking at what other people were doing, and Google has an approach similar to the one that we're going to use. So we wanted to prototype it with the JavaScript API, and we have a little accessible map demo. We're going to show you how a screen reader interacts with this demo. So I'm going to turn it on, and hopefully the sound will come on. It's about a minute long, and you can hear how a screen reader is interacting with this page. So let me see if I can play it.
VoiceOver on Safari. A11Y map window has keyboard focus. You are currently on a web application. Enable keyboard navigation button. You are currently on a button. To click this button, press Control, Option, Space. Web application. Use the arrow keys to navigate the map and find features. Use the plus key to zoom into the map and the minus key to zoom out. For details on your current area, press the I key. Press the H key to return to the starting map location. 1. Summit Road. 2. Flagstaff Summit East. 3. Settlers Park. 4. Centennial. 5. Chautauqua. 6. Enchanted Mesa. 7. Gregory Canyon. 9. See more results. You are currently on an image. Panorama Point. 7. Crown Rock. 9. See more results. Settlers Park. 2. Centennial. 3. Halfway House. Web application collapse. Web dialog. Centennial Trailhead is located at 301 Sunshine Canyon Road at an elevation of 5,552 feet. Horseback riding is not recommended on this trail. ADA accessibility for this trail is rated as difficult. Dogs allowed. Yes. Biking allowed. No picnic tables available. Yes. You are currently on a web dialog. Collapse button banner dock button. You are currently on a button. To zoom to button collapse web application Centennial. You are currently in a group. To exit this group, press Control Option Shift up arrow. VoiceOver off.
Okay, so that gave you a little bit of an understanding, if you've never heard a screen reader before, of what it's like to interact with the page through a screen reader. There's some, some little quirks there, but overall, it got people the information that they needed. They were able to navigate through the features, select a feature using an associated number key, open a pop-up, and read that pop-up information. So it's one more option that might be useful in certain situations.
Voiceover on Safari.
So the source code for this is available in this GitHub repository. It's written in TypeScript using JavaScript API version 4. It's on 4.7 right now, which will be released later this month. It's a prototype. There's some issues with the code. I need to fix a few things. There are active issues in there, and if you notice something with it, feel free to submit an issue and we'll work on getting it fixed. There are a few issues in there from people who are disabled, who tested the site and gave us some feedback, so we're working on incorporating some of those, but it's there for you to play around with as one option for making an accessible map.
Okay, switch back to me. Okay, so just want to give a shout out. We have another session right after this as for DIY usability testing. I'm part of the UX UI group and Esri, so my colleagues here will talk about how do you do usability testing. So if you have the chance, stay in this room, and it will be a fun session. But that's the end of the presentation here today. We want to encourage you to take the survey and give us feedback. It's really important for us to take your feedback, and then we'll make a presentation better next year. So make sure you get a chance to open up the events app and give us feedback. And that's end of the presentation. We have a few minutes for questions. Yes?
When you are using a non-interactive HTML element, so when you're taking something like a div and making it a button, you need to tell it that it has to have a tab index. So those are the cases. If you're using an interactive element like a button, or a link, they already have a tab index. You don't need to set it. So it's only if you're using something, a non-semantic, so a div or a span to be something else. So then you need to give it a tab index. I don't know if you
Yeah, so like say all of the native interactive elements, so like link, button, checkbox, those things, they already have the tab index built into the HTML spec. So you don't have to do anything about it. But when you say, like Kelly said, if you write a button using div, you want the keyboard user to be able to tap to that button, right? So you need to add tab index equal to 0 to that. Yeah.
Because by default, you can't tab to the non-interactive elements. You have to tell it that you want to tab to it. In reality, it's better just, if you can, to use the appropriate element, right?
So if you're using keyboard navigation, you've got the skip to content, which is pretty typical. I can get over the navigation part. And so you're not using a screen reader, but is there some sort of feature like Rotor where you can kind of automatically get back to the headings so you can see, you're deep into content.
Yeah.
How do you do that with keyboard navigation?
So for screen, so there's two types of keyboard users, if you will. One is they may be sighted, but they can, for some reason, they cannot use mouse. They have to use keyboard. So the skip navigation link is really useful for those type of users. They can see where that link is. They can see, hey, that skip navigation has focus. They can click on enter and then jump to the main section of the page. For the second type of keyboard user who are non-sighted, they use the landmark rows. So they open up the screen reader, they see the rotor, they see all the landmarks that you define in the page. So they can say, hey, I'm at the banner, I can jump to the main section, I can jump to footer, I can jump to the sidebar. So they don't necessarily need to use the skip navigation. But if they tap from the top of the page, they can still set focus to the skip navigation link. So it's another option for screen reader users.
So what about that first group? If you're deep in content, how do you get back to the navigation?
Got it.
Shift tab.
Shift tab all the way back to the top. But
That's what I've done, and I just thought it was a better solution.
yeah, I think I think that's a good user experience issue. But I think the biggest problem or the bigger problem is that the user, if you don't have the skip navigation link, the user will never open up the new page of your site. They have to tab through all the header, all the menu to the main content. I think that's a bigger UX issue than the going back to the top. Yeah. But yeah, I think we have, I think on Esri.com we have some kind of like a pattern that you can, we always show like a go back to top link. I think that link is also tabbable, so you can potentially like set focus to that link and jump to the top of the page. But that's a good observation. Thanks. Yes.
In terms of the screen reader demo that you showed on the map, where it's kind of reading the different features, how much of that functionality is, customizing the web application, and how much of that is going to be or is baked into the API?
Yeah, so that's a good question. The question was the map demo we showed where you could navigate through the map and look at the features. How much of that is custom web app versus baked into the API? So that is a web app written using the JavaScript API. All we do is put an extent rectangle on the page, query the layers for features within that extent rectangle and show them. So it's using the JavaScript API to create it. Currently, we have an issue open with one of the developers, and we're trying to figure out the best way of making the map interactive out of the box. This is one option. I don't know that this is the approach that we're going to go with, but we're looking at the problem and trying to come up with the best scenario or the best solution that's going to make an accessible map. There's a long issue trail with lots of back and forth and different ideas. So we just want to do it. We want to do it right, but until we get something, it's something developers can build in. We have the tools available. The test map also has a few other features. If you don't know where you are in the world, we tell them they can press the I button and get information. We'll do a reverse geocode and present the address information where they're located. As they arrow around, we tell them if they're moving north, south, east, and west. It should announce that with the ARIA live regions. It doesn't always, so I said there's some funkiness there that I'm trying to get to work right. But so it is a prototype, but we are trying different things, and we hope to have something that will be in all, maps at some point, but I don't know when that some point will be.
Yeah, I would say definitely encourage you developers, look at the prototype and give us feedback and submit issues, make a branch, submit PR request. We'll definitely take a look at it. I think we're a small group. We definitely need the community work together to make that prototype better.
How well does that prototype work in other browsers, other voice readers? Have you tested a lot of different applications on the map?
So I've tested that app with JAWS. I have JAWS license. I've tested with JAWS and I've tested with VoiceOver on Mac, and that's it. And it works. It works fairly well in both with some quirks.
I would say that it's really hard or almost impossible to make a website working well with all the screen readers. So I think even W3C said that if you prioritize or focus on a particular type of a screen reader, that's totally acceptable. And also, there's a user survey that WebM does every year. Then they will tell you how many users are using VoiceOver, how many users are using NVDA or JAWS. So you can get a sense of the distribution of user and what you should prioritize. Yeah. Yes.
Your organization or methods that certify your code as being compliant to
That's a good question. I don't think there's a universal organization or certification process. All we follow is the WCAG success criterion, and the criterion are written in a way that it's pretty specific. So you have to meet this criteria, you have to do this and do that. So we use that as a test standard